So why don't we get started? First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Mario Sanchez. I'm part of the Learn team here at Sumo Logic. And you guys you'll notice that you're all on mute, and that's just to avoid distractions. But if you have any questions, feel free to send them through the question chat, or we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. But by all means, send any questions as we go. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that tab just to make sure that I can answer the questions as we go. And the other question that I normally get is this going to get recorded? And the answer is yes. I'm recording this session, and I will send you all at the end of the session or later this week, both a link to this recording as well as the slides for the session as well. So there's going to be a lot of sample template queries and whatnot that you might want to borrow from this deck. So I'll for sure make sure that you get a copy of them. All right, so with that said, let's get started. This session is focused specifically on security analytics, how to use Sumo Logic for security analytics. But the big idea here is to show you how to use Sumo Logic as well. So first thing, we're going to start with these five points, and the first one is kind of 30,000-foot view, a little bit of how to, like, how does security analytics help you. And I'm going to demo that. I'm going to show you that with a demo. We're going to do a detect and investigate demo and show you how you can use Sumo Logic for security. And then we're going to start diving a little bit into it. I'm going to show you some basic operators, fairly straightforward. So some of this stuff should be reviewed. Most of you should have already attended a quick start webinar to see the basic tool set that you have. But quickly, we're going to move on to the advanced analytics. How can I use some of the advanced operators so that we can start identifying potential threats and keeping our environment secure? We're going to then move on to how do I start monitoring my environment? And by this, we mean how do you create dashboards that can help you identify trends, that you can see outliers, and also how can you create alerts so you can start identifying those critical events and get notified of those critical events. And the last two steps is I'm going to show you a lot of apps. So step number 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to be showing you how to build stuff. Step number 4 is all about how can you take advantage of the already built content. So out of the box content around security and compliance that Sumo Logic offers to you guys for free. And the last one is next steps, what's available to you, including certification. So with that said, this webinar is paired up with hands-on labs, and I'm going to highly suggest that you try those hands-on labs. Unfortunately, we won't have time to do all those here in this next few moments, but for sure you have access to this training instance, and you'll be able to do the labs. So let me point you first to where those labs are, and you'll be able to do these on your own. What you want to do is if you go to your instance, let me just do this. Okay, if you go to your own instance, which should look something like this, you will have an area called a tab called Learn and a second tab called Certification. If you go to this Certification tab, you notice that this is the one that we're doing today, Sumo Security Power User, in order to get certified. So it's an online exam, 30 questions. You have 60 minutes to complete it. In order to prep for that, you can attend this webinar, which you're attending today, and you can try these hands-on labs. I'm going to open them up here, and what you'll notice is, let me just make this a little bit bigger for you. These hands-on labs have some credentials to allow you to log into the training instance. This training instance just has data that allows you to run through a lot of these labs. And I'll be going back and forth into these labs to try out some of these simple labs as we're going through our training today. All right. So let's go back to that piece there. Let's talk a little bit about security analytics and what Sumo Logic offers. So for one, Sumo Logic offers real-time insights to streamline your compliance and your security. So for example, you're trying to meet your compliance deadlines, or you're trying to identify potential security breaches so you can reduce your security risks. You're trying to identify new threat patterns, or really at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're looking to transform your manual process into some sort of proactive automated process as well. So we're going to see how you can use Sumo for that kind of stuff. And then the second area, which is related, is start automating your threat detection across your microservices, your cloud-based technology, your applications, really just about anything. So start identifying that threat detection before it actually causes any havoc in your environment, right? If we go down one level deep, these are some examples of security use cases. So for example, you might want to be monitoring root logins. We all know that you shouldn't be doing any work from a root user, but so you might want to keep an eye on when are my people or some bad actors using root to log in. You might want to monitor your web activity for bad traffic. How about your rules for ingress and outgress? How do you keep an eye on those? Or from a compliance perspective, how do you identify services that haven't had patches in X number of days, right? So you start seeing how we can start using these very specific use cases. Let me just walk you through one in a simple demo that I'm going to show you how to go about detecting and investigating a threat in my environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this fake company called Travelogic. And like many of you have used in the past, this is just a website that allows me to do some flights, some hotels, some car hire. What is important to know is that Travelogic is a modern app. Like many of you, or what most of you are securing in your own organizations, this Travelogic as a modern app has a lot of moving parts. It's got a database behind it. It's got a lot of, it's got containers, it's got Kubernetes, it's got microservices. And so how do we keep an eye on all those? How do we secure the data as it's going from one place to the other? How do we keep bad actors from wedging themselves into all these moving parts that we have with Travelogic? So what I'm going to show you is a demo of this. I thought before I went deep dive into security, just give you an overview of what other types of dashboards we can put together. So for example, if we have a business analysts that are interested in my in the health of the app, I can put together something like this dashboard that you're seeing here. It's showing me application status, payment status, website status. Looks like some stuff is going on because I see some reds in here. So this gives my business analysts a little bit of an insight rather than them having to hit our DevOps team every time to ask questions. They can see locations from where flights and hotels and car hires are being booked. They can even see outliers when their bookings dip a little bit in their environment. They can even see a distribution of their bookings, in this case, this bottom left called the booking split, as well as bookings over time, as well as hourly bookings. And you can imagine that, for example, if we know that we normally have about 10,000 bookings, anything under that could be shown in a red numbers, whereas anything above it could be shown in green numbers as well. So this is just an example of a dashboard that we could share, say, with some business analysts in our environment. Here is another example of what we could share from an operational standpoint. This is more for the DevOps team. They want to keep an eye on VPC flow logs on the product service. Perhaps this happens to be sitting on AWS, so this is my RDS database, any errors that I have had in there. This is my checkout service, my service nodes, my ELB. So you notice how this is a high-level overview of all the moving parts in my environment. And if everything was green, that would be a happy camper. But in this case, there's a little bit of work here for our DevOps team to take care of some of this stuff. You also notice that just by this little mention here, we are actually sending some Slack messages to our Travel Ops Slack channel. So if you are seeing a lot of reds here, it's very likely that Travel Ops channel has a lot of alerts telling our DevOps team that a lot of stuff is going on. But we're here because of security. So let me show you an example of a dashboard that we could put together from a security perspective. This is not the dashboard. This is a dashboard that is good from a security perspective. And let me walk you through a few things here, and then we can kind of talk about an example of how this could work. And by the way, by the end of today, I'm going to be showing you quite a few different security dashboards so you have examples of what you can do. But this one that I'm showing you, let me make it a little bit bigger for all of you to make sure that everybody can see what's on screen. That top left-hand side, let me actually expand it to show you what's going on in here. This is showing me SSO and non-SSO login locations into my environment, right? So right off the bat, I'm getting a good visibility of where most of my users are coming from. And in this case, it's merging both my SSO, which is Okta, and my non-SSO logins into my environment. This one here is quite an interesting one. This middle one is looking at all my Okta logs, and it is using a tool that we call threat intelligence. This is a service that Sumo Logic offers. I'll show you in a little bit how this works, but essentially it's taking all IP addresses, it's taking all emails, all file names, all URLs, and it's checking them against a database offered by one of our partners called CrowdStrike. And it's coming back and letting us know if this is an indicator of compromise, an IOC, if there's any potential threats. So if you notice in this particular case, it's coming back and it says that I have about 108 IP addresses that have a malicious confidence of high. It's not necessarily saying that I've been breached or this is bad, but it's something noteworthy that it's bubbling up and letting me know that I might want to take some action or I might want to investigate this kind of stuff. Here's another interesting one. Look at this one on the right-hand side. Let me just expand it for you. This one is called suspicion login distances. In this particular case, it's showing me that a user named Damon, Damon at sumologic.com, logged in from two different IP addresses, from a 75 dot something and a 156 dot something. And it's even showing me what are the countries that these IPs are based out of. So it looks like this person logged in from the US as well as from Egypt. But it goes even a step further and is showing me that that's about 10,000 miles apart, one from the other. So either this person is a very fast flyer, or it's probable that their credentials have been breached and someone is logging in from a different location. Or it could be possible that they're using VPN. The point here is it's not telling you that something is happening. It's serving up a lot of these things that you can take a little further action into. We're going to come back into this one a little bit because it's pretty interesting. I would love to understand what's going on from that IP address and what's going on with that user. But let's take a peek at other stuff in here. For example, here I have network and network traffic and data exfiltration. So this is showing me that a lot of data, I have spikes in these in the data that is being sent out of my S3 buckets, right? If you notice, there's a peak right here, there's another peak right here. So this is giving me a good sense of data exfiltration. I was mentioning before that this sits on top of AWS. So this is showing me AWS guard duty data. And it's showing me signatures or things that seem a little bit off. So for example, this IP address seems to be communicating on an unusual server port, right? So that's kind of that's the message that I'm being served in here, right? If you look at this text right here, it's saying that I'm having some sort of communication in an unusual server port. So again, this is all information that it's passing on to me with some idea that I might want to look into this a little bit further. If you notice this one down here at the bottom, this VPC flow data volume, this is showing me outliers of data volume that is going through my VPC flow network, right? So I have a spike here, I have another spike here. These little pink triangles are showing me cases where data volume is more than what was expected or that has been in the past. And here's another one from my Palo Alto network traffic, right? I see some spikes here. So what you notice is we've put together a dashboard with data source, with multiple different data sources. This is Okta, this here is guard duty, this happens to be my S3 bucket, this happens to be my my VPC flow log, this happens to be my Palo Alto network. So kind of a dashboard that is allowing me to look into various of these different areas that I want to monitor. How about file integrity and malware? So this one is showing me event history from my anti-malware. So I can see which events have been delete events or deny access or quarantine, and I can see that over time. And over here on the right-hand side, I see integrity monitoring and event history. Later on, I'm gonna show you a little bit about our apps. I was talking about that out-of-the-box content. A lot of these panels, for example, this one comes from that Palo Alto Network app, and this one comes from the VPC Flow Log app, and say this one up here is coming from Okta. So I haven't necessarily built a lot of this. I've repurposed a lot of these dashboards from other places. But let's go back to our suspicious login that we had over here. It looks like our user Damon logged in from a couple of different places. Let's do this. We've set up our dashboard to be able to take some filters, and some of the filters that it allows us to do includes the user. So let's narrow down our data here, and let's look specifically for this user that we know is doing some suspicious activity, logging in from multiple places. Let's take a peek at. I don't know why my map went all dark all of a sudden. Let's see if this is happening here. So, okay, now that I've narrowed down my my map, or that I filtered out my dashboard to only that user, I see the logins from that particular user, and I see that 4 logins were from the U.S. and 1 login was from Egypt. I could take it a little bit further and say, well, listen. That was what was happening in this last 60 minutes. But what if I were to change my time frame, right? What if I want to look for the last 24 hours to find out if that's something that was happening only now, or it's been going on for a bit? And if I look at that, I look that in the last 24 hours, I've had 95 logins from here from the U.S., but I've also had 24 logins from Egypt. So clearly, this login has been, it's not like someone was here in the US and then flew to Egypt and logged from there, but in reality, it's been happening from both locations because I looked at a longer period of time and both increased. So the other thing that I find is I have an IP address here that is maps to the US. Let's look at this IP address that maps to Egypt. I'm gonna filter by that one as well in here. And again, what I've done is I've created dashboards that have filters, and these filters are allowing me to look at the data for those particular time periods. And if you look at it, now that I've filtered by this IP address in particular, which seems to be logging from that same data at place in Egypt, I see that I'm having some data volume in the last 60 minutes. I had a bit of a point here. I also see my VPC flow data volume outlier showing up a spike over here. What might be a little bit more worrying to me is that if I look at guard duty, and if I look at that particular IP address, which I filtered by, it looks like what I'm doing is I'm doing a get object, which means that someone is retrieving data from my environment from that IP address. And it even, guard duty even serves it up and says that it was invoked from an unusual IP address. So I'm starting to dive into this and I'm starting to get worried because it looks like, yes, a lot of get object, or at least one get object was invoked. So one of the things that I can do for any of these panels, let me close this filter here for a second. For any of these panels, I can actually dive into the details of that panel. And if I click on that icon, it actually takes me to the query behind it. And now that I have this query, let me actually do this. By the end of today, by the way, you will know what this is all about. But let me simplify it for now, and let's just look for this kind of data that I have here. And since I know this has been going on for quite a while, let me look at the last I don't know, 3 hours, so I can see what kind of stuff has been happening in my environment. And what you find here is when you run a quick query, you start finding that yeah, unfortunately, I've gotten quite a lot of gets. If you look at this here, and here is the file name that this has been doing. So it's actually, if you notice here, I have a lot of get object. As a matter of fact, let me highlight this get object and add it to my query as a selected text as an and. So now you notice my query just became source category equals labs security demo S3 and the get object. So that's only going to go find out those messages that have the word get object in it. And unfortunately, I see that a lot of data has been going out through this particular API. So this is quite worrying. It looks like a lot of data is going out, but at least I've found what it is, and I can now take action and go block that IP address or whatever it is that I want to do from an action perspective. But what you've basically seen me do is look into a dashboard or use something like a dashboard, like the starting point, to start diving and finding a little bit more information. In this case, finding out that data has been that I have a lot of data exfiltration happening from a particular IP address. Now, let's say that this was something that was going on, and I want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So how do I do that? How can I make sure that I am alerted of this stuff happening? Because I could have been alerted of this 24 hours ago when it first started happening, rather than identifying it now, just because I was looking at this dashboard. So let me just show you, sort of just to complete the, to close the circle, let me show you how would you set up an alert to let you be notified of this kind of stuff in the future so that it doesn't happen again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this outlier here as the trigger for my alert. So you notice this little pink triangle. Let me dive into the query behind this, and I can do that by clicking on this little icon here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this particular query. Again, there it is. So everything seemed okay, and then at some particular point, I had this big spike, right? So much so that it's actually identifying it as an outlier because it has a little pink triangle. The good news for me is that if I go to the table view of that stuff, what that looks like is it shows me the bytes, it shows me an upper level, a lower level, an indicator, a violation. And this is the key one, because if you look at this violation, somewhere down here, there is a 1. And that 1 is identifying the fact, it corresponds to that little pink triangle. So remember this little pink triangle I was seeing here? That corresponds to a 1 in bytes violation. So if I can do the following, and this is very SQL-like, so I'm just going to do a where clause here, where bytes violation is greater than 0, right? So with this query now, if I have no pink triangles, then guess what? I'm going to get absolutely no results in this query. But if I were to have any pink triangles, then they would show up. This query would provide those results, because in this case, I have a 1 under bytes violation. Right? So with that said, I can save this query, but part of saving that query allows me to schedule this query to run on a regular basis. And I can say, oh, I would like this query to run in real time or on an hourly basis, or you can even choose a custom cron time frame if you wanted to as well. But let's keep it simple. I'm going to say it's going to run hourly. I can choose the time period that I wanted to run. For example, let's say that I was based out of Chicago. I wanted to run on an hourly basis with a Chicago timestamp. I want to choose 60 minutes worth of data, and I want you to send me a notification. Perhaps I don't want it every time the search is complete, because that might be a lot of noise, but instead I can say, I only want you to send me a notification if the following condition is met. So if the number of results were to be 0, then I don't want to get any alerts, because that means there were no violations. But if the number of results happens to be greater than 0, meaning that there is a byte violation, then I want to get notified. And then it goes on to, if I want to get notified by email, I can specify the email here. I can build the email subject, and I can specify what I want the body of that message to be. Or we'll talk a little bit about this later. I can choose some of these other options, including sending it as a webhook to, say, a Slack channel or a PagerDuty or a HipChat or whatever you happen to be using. So there you go. This lets you see how I can use a dashboard as a starting point, as a way to monitor my data, but I can also use alerts to allow me to notify me of what's going on in my environment. Let me pause there for a second. Are there any questions from you guys from what you've seen? All right. Silence, I'll take that as no questions. So, and again, remember, there is a tab for you to ask questions, but also we will have time a little bit at the end to do this stuff. So with that said, then, you've seen here's a couple of the security use cases. I've just shown you one particular one, how to detect and investigate. In this case, I'm having a lot of data exfiltrated from my environment, and I want to keep an eye on that kind of stuff as well. All right, so most of you, if not all of you, should hopefully gone through a quick start. So a lot of the searching and parsing that I'm going to show you right now should be a little bit of review. In order to start searching your data, what we recommend is that you use metadata and that you use keywords. The example here is showing you how you can use source categories, labs, AWS CloudTrail, and the keyword root. So let me just use that as an example to run a search in my environment here. Let me go to and by the way, this environment that I'm going to be using right now, this environment is the exact same training environment that you have access to. So if you try your labs, you will have access to this same exact environment that I'm about to use right now. So 95, 98% of your queries should be using source category, meaning the way that we tag the data. We covered this in the quick start, but basically every single message that comes into Sumo gets tagged with this different metadata tags. And we usually, best practices, recommend using source category. In my case, I've created a source category for my data. I got my CloudTrail data here. So if I search for labs AWS CloudTrail data, this is giving me 15 minutes worth of CloudTrail data. But I could say only find me those that have the word root in it, as you see here, right? So point number one is whenever possible, which is most of the time, you want to be using metadata and keywords when you're searching for your data, right? That's going to filter down the data as much as you can so that then you can start acting on that data. Second thing is we talked about this in the first session in level 1, which is a quick start. You have the ability to do LiveTail. And what LiveTail does is, let me just copy this to show you LiveTail. LiveTail allows you, as the name suggests, it allows you to tail your logs. So in this case, I am looking at a LiveTail of all my AWS data. It should be coming here in a second, I hope. And you'll notice that one of the things that I can do is I can start highlighting specific terms, right? For example, I can highlight the term API, or I can highlight the term error, or I can highlight the term, I don't know, true, right? Oops, true. And you notice that my data has those particular phrases highlighted. I can scroll up, I can scroll down, I can pause it. Essentially, what this gives me is the ability to tail those logs without having me, without the necessity for me to jump into those particular boxes, but instead I can tail them from here. Which is a very handy tool. The other thing to know is that there is a command line interface. So if you haven't seen it, our documentation talks about how to download it and set it up so that you can run this kind of tailing from your command line. All right. So whenever you can, you want to use metadata, you want to use keywords. There's the ability to use LiveTail. Again, this should all hopefully be reviewed for all of you, as you should have seen this. You should have seen this before. Also, a review is the fact that you want to start parsing your data, right? And by parsing your data, I mean, for example, let's say that I would want to parse the event name over here. So in this case, my data happens to be JSON formatted. So what I'm going to do is use the JSON operator, JSON, and I can specify what I want to parse. So in this case, I'm going to parse event name. So I'm going to use event name. And by doing that, what happens is that field called event name gets parsed out of the message. And now I can do things like count by event name, because event name is now a field that is available to me. And there you go. So now I have, for the last 15 minutes, a count of all the different event names, and I can tell that the start login is the event that happens the most, and then schedule key, and so on. You might have also heard that JSON has the ability to use JSON auto. And in this case, what happens is, because everybody knows JSON, what we do is we traverse the entire JSON tree. Doesn't matter how many levels it has, as you see here. It could be quite a few levels deep. What happens is Sumo will traverse the entire tree. It'll automatically parse all the fields, and then those fields are available to you here in the field browser. So there you go, event time, event source, event name, event ID. So you notice that all those different events have been parsed, all those different fields have been parsed out for me. So I can now do something like count by event ID, right? And I can use those event IDs as a field because it's been parsed by that. All right, so a little bit of a review. This should have all been a little bit of a review for you. Search with metadata and keywords. You have the ability to use LiveTail, and you want to start parsing your data as much as you can. There are quite a few different parsing options. If your data happens to be structured, you can use parse anchor. If your data is JSON, you can use the JSON operator. But the other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you start implementing your field extraction rules. Again, hopefully this is a little bit of a review, but if you have a field extraction rule, that means that you do not need to parse your data during the query. Let me show you an example. I have a field extraction rule in place for my Apache Access data. So I'm going to go search source category labs Apache Access. If you look at this data, this field here, if I run a query for that, because there is a field extraction rule in place, a field that is already extracting automatically all those fields for me, those fields are available for me here. Their status code, their source IP, there is URL. These are all fields that have been pre-parsed. Therefore, I have the ability to do something like count by status code without any need for me to parse status code because that field already exists. How do you build your field extraction rules? You want to go under Manage Data, Settings, and one of the options in here is Field Extraction Rules. And as you see in here, there is a field extraction rule here in place. Let me just go edit it so you can see how it was built. This field extraction rule, which has a funky name, by the way, this is a training instance, so there's a lot of stuff here that looks a little weird, but that's okay. What this is saying is, listen, any data that has a source category of something Apache Access, meaning it could be prod Apache Access, labs Apache Access, dev Apache Access, whatever the case might be, I want you to parse it with the following expression. And in this case, it's using parse regex, right? It's saying, listen, go find this pattern, which is 1 to 3 digits followed by a period, 1 to 3 digits, a period of 1 to 3 digits. That sounds like an IP address, right? Go find that pattern. And if you find it, store it in a field called IP. Find method, find URL, find status code, and store all those fields in for us and parse them out. So this is the field extraction rule that is allowing me to not have to parse for this particular query in here. Why is that? Because all those fields, as I showed you before, already exist here in the field extraction rule. All right, so if there's anything that one of the main things that you should be taking from this webinar is go implement your field extraction rules. Figure out what is the parsing that you want to do for your data and build those parsing field extraction rules, because they are going to make your life and your team's life a lot easier going forward. All right, I mentioned that there are hands-on labs. These are this is where if we were delivering this live, this is where we would pause and allow you to tackle them. By the way, those labs are the ones that I showed you. So this would allow you to try lab number 1, which is fairly straightforward. Lab number 2, which is just some simple parsing. And then lab number 3, which shows you a few parsing options. Let's just grab this one here, lab number 2, so that you can see how this was put together. Again, a lot of this should be review for you, but let's just run this one. In this case, I'm saying source category equals labs AWS trail. Then I am parsing out AWS region, and then I'm filtering out and saying I only care for AWS region equals US West. And then I am doing additional parsing. I'm going on and parsing the IP address out of those messages, and then I'm counting by IP address, and then I'm getting only the top 10 IP addresses by count. So what this did is it went through the motions of parsing out a few things and finding the top 10 IP addresses from the US West 1 AWS region. So let's run that query and check out the results. And there you go. These results are showing me the top 10 IP addresses from the AWS region. And I achieved that by doing some parsing, doing additional parsing, by filtering out the messages that I had, by doing some aggregation, and eventually by doing some formatting of the data that I wanted to display. Any questions? Make sense? Good, good, good. All right. So again, these labs are available for you guys to try, and it walks you in detail through what the lab is doing. So let's talk a little bit about simple analytics. What you saw me do before, and here's a good example of it, is the query itself is just keywords and operators that are separated by pipes, and they build one on top of each other. So for example, in this query, I'm looking for labs AWS CloudTrail data that has the word root. So I'm using metadata, I'm using keywords, and I'm sending those messages on to parse. In this case, I'm parsing the JSON, I'm doing the JSON parsing. I'm looking for specific, I'm doing additional parsing to a field. So here's a field called user identity that I parsed, and then I go ahead and do additional parsing. I say, okay, field user identity, I want to parse it further, and I want to find out the type and the ARN for that. And then I want to filter. I want to say where type equals root. So I'm doing additional filtering, and then I'm doing some sort of aggregation and eventually some formatting. So that's the basic syntax that Sumo uses. It's a lot of operators separated by pipes to be able to build your query. Okay, so let's actually build this same query. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat because I think I have that query already built somewhere in here. So I'm going to go here, and I believe that one is this one here. Let's just open this query that I have already, and there you go. So that's exactly what this query is doing in here. If you notice, it is looking for CloudTrail data that has the word root. It's then doing some parsing of some fields. It does additional parsing of the field called user identity. It then says where type equals root, so I only care for those that have a type of root. And then it even goes further and says, by the way, I do not want those that have a source IP address of Amazon AWS. And then because the message time has a lot of hours, minutes, and seconds, and I really only care for years, month, and day, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the format date function here to create a new field called date, and then I'm counting by date, event name, event type, and so on. So let's just run this query for the last 24 hours, and you should get some results that look something like that. I'm going to click on this little icon here, which makes my results take over the screen, and there you go. So now I have it sorted by date and broken by event name, event type, source IP address, type, the ARN, and account, which is all of them are by one. But that's an easy way for you to identify to monitor and identify all the account usage that I'm having for that root account, right? Because I remember this where type equals root. Let's see, I'm having a question from someone. Oh yeah, here, great question. So the question I have from Nathan is, why do we need root in the first line? Isn't it redundant? We're using a where as well. So if you notice, the question comes from this. The question is, why are we filtering by root here if we are going to be filtering by root here as well? And the answer, Nathan, it has two sides to it. The first one is, you are absolutely correct. We do not need root here because at the end of the day, we're going to be filtering out here. However, it's just a good best practice to also put it in here. And here's the reason why. Because remember that every single line takes the results and feeds them onto the next one, right? So if I did not have the word root here, let's say that I would select 10,000 messages. Those 10,000 messages then get parsed again, and then only here do I get rid of 8,000 of those messages and just keep 2,000 because I said where type equals root, right? So what happened is I had to parse about 10,000 messages before I got to this. Whereas if you just say and root, meaning, listen, if it doesn't have the word root in it, I don't even want that message, it's possible that it's going to do a lot less parsing at the top because it's going to get rid of a lot more messages. So the more filtering you can do at the top, the better, because that means that you're going to be getting rid of a lot of messages earlier on. Does that make sense? Great, great, great. Okay, so here's an even, thanks for the question, Ethan, because this is going to lead me to another one. Let's say that we had a field extraction rule that is already parsing these fields for us, right? So if we had a field extraction rule in place that already parses all this stuff, then our query would be a lot easier, right? It would be this. We could actually improve that query a lot better because we could do this kind of stuff. Look at this, and root type equals root. Why could we do that? Because type is already a field that exists. As a matter of fact, we could even make it better, and we could do it like this. And source IP address matches, that kind of stuff. So this is just showing you how field extraction rules will make your queries a lot easier to read because you're no longer parsing in line. But not only that, I can actually create this kind of query right from the bat and limit the number of messages that I'm bringing into Sumo because I now have the ability to filter them right at the top. All right, so that's actually a great question that has to do a lot with just performance and being able to weed out the messages that you don't need. Okay. Let's get back to this. So here's the message that here's the query that I run. There were my results down there. And as a matter of fact, I believe this is one of the labs that you end up doing in the hands-on labs. So simple analytics, the usual suspects are there: the count, sum, min, max, the average, right? From a conditional perspective, you have the if, you have matches, you have the in operator, filter, the where. From a formatting perspective, a few obscure ones, but in general, the ability to transpose, to turn a list into a table, to hide the different fields that you're wanting to put in your results, to limit your results by X number of results, to sort, to show only the top 10 or the top 15. Unfortunately, I don't have time to show you all operators. However, I do want to point that if you go to the Learn tab, there's two things I want to point out. First is, if you go to the Learn tab, there is a cheat sheet that has all operators in there. So you can use that cheat sheet to quickly sift through and identify the operator that you want and then dig a little bit deeper. And then the other thing I want to point out is that you can go into our community. This is forums, and the forums has a lot of solutions or a lot of templates, a lot of queries that other people have built that are going to make it pretty helpful for you. So first, let me show you the cheat sheets, and then we're going to dive into community. I'm going to go here into the same instance. I'm going to go into the Learn tab, and in here, there's a cheat sheet. And you'll notice here that the cheat sheet is broken by function. So parsing operators. Remember, we had that parse regex. Somewhere in there, there's that JSON operator as well. If you're sending us CSV format files, guess what? We have an operator for that. If you're sending us key value, like name equals Mario, company equals Sumo Logic, we can use the key value operator for that as well. So aggregation operators are all in here as well. So let's say that you were looking for a particular one. You can come in here. Let's say you were looking for, I don't know, the filter operator and how to use it. This gives you an example, but you can always click on it and go find a little bit more detail on that stuff. So there's a cheat sheet for you to get started, but also I wanted to show you community. I'm going to click here on community and just show you that we have in community, a whole bunch of if you're trying to understand how to use Sumo Logic, how to send data, how to manage it, we have all these different forums. And in each one of those, we have a lot of information, not only from us, but from other users as well. As a matter of fact, I believe the first lab here has you do exactly that, which is the one that we just did. But if you notice, this is sending you to community under query library. If you search for security related queries for AWS, this will be good for you to know. So I'm just going to go under query library, and I'm going to do a quick search for security. Yeah, there we go. So a quick search for security, and you will notice that there's quite a few posts here that have to do with security from various users. There's a post here that has security-related queries for AWS. Look at this other one, security-related queries for Windows, security-related queries for Linux, security-related queries for Palo Alto networks and other firewalls. Let's take a peek at the first one, which is the one that they were sending us to. And it looks like Mary has done a post here showing you how to monitor AWS root account usage. Does this look familiar? It looks exactly like what we just ran, right? So she's showing you here what the query is and what the solution, what the results would look like. Look at this other one. How to identify those ingress security groups that allow the permit any, which hopefully you shouldn't have any of those, but here is a query to identify those exactly. Here's another one on how to monitor users that are logging from different IP addresses, right? So here's a query of how to do that kind of stuff as well. So anyway, my point is, community has a lot of information out there that it's going to be pretty helpful for you to tackle. So lab number 4A has you go to that particular post and try it out, and it's breaking it down here for you. Again, it's starting with metadata, it's using keywords, it then does a little bit of parsing. Notice that it's using a node drop. A node drop is an option to say, listen, if you do not find these fields in a message, don't drop them. I'm going to use additional parsing later on, right? It's doing further filtering here by using some where clauses, it's doing some formatting, and eventually it's doing a little bit of aggregation as well. This lab is having you go to the same post and do the monitoring the security groups. And the third lab here is asking you to try the impossible travel scenario. So again, I would highly encourage you to try those labs because they're going to give you a lot of insight into what you can do in there. Let's go to a little bit more advanced analytics. Hopefully a lot of the stuff you just saw was a little bit of a review. Maybe a few new things, but let's talk a little bit more of the advanced analytics. Here's one of my favorite ones. There is a tool for you called log reduce. Let me set up the example and then we're going to try it out. So I'm going to look at some snort data. The snort data is called lab security snort. So let's try that out. I'm going to go here back to our instance and just run a new query that is going to be searching for source category equals labs security snort data. There we go. So here's my snort data. And probably most of you know what snort data is. It's network intrusion data. And what I want to do with this snort data is I want to figure out if there's anything new going on. For example, if I knew that I was looking for, I don't know, a Trojan horse, I can enter the word Trojan, and any results that have the word Trojan would come back in here. Or if I was looking for an attack, I can enter the word attack, and I would get a lot of results with the word attack in it, and then I can skim through it and find out what's going on. But what if I don't know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for something, but is it a new attack? And if it is, what's the name of it and how do I call it? So what I'm going to show you is I can look, let's make this a little bit bigger. How about 60 minutes worth of data? So I've got 60 minutes worth of data, which in reality is about 6,000 messages, right? 6,500 messages. And that's a lot of messages to get through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this log reduce button. And what log reduce allows me to do, or what it's doing for me, is it's actually compiling all my messages, all my 6,000 messages. It compiled them and it grouped them into what it calls signatures. So it came back and it said, hey, Mario, you had 6,000 messages, but of those 6,000 messages, 3,214 of those messages all were very similar. Of course, they had a different bug port. Maybe they had a different date, and that's why it looks like a variable in here. But everything else on that message was identical. So I lumped them into, or I grouped them into this source, into this signature. And then it went on and told me each one of these signatures and how many times it happened. So what this allows you to do is, it allows you to easily, notice that now I have page 1 of 1. It allows me to easily skim down through the things that happen a lot and focus on only those that don't happen that often. So look at this one. Here I go. I have an attempted denial of service, right? And I have this other one, an IP scan attempt that is only happening once. So if I want to investigate a little further, now I have something that is only happening once, and I'm a little bit worried that this is going to create more havoc. So I can even go and look further into that message. I can identify the message itself. I can see that it happened on October 17 at 5:30. I can see the actual detail of it, attempted denial of service. I have an IP address, port number from the destination as well as the source, and I can do a little bit of investigation on it. I can now go and investigate on that IP address, or I could even take it a step further. Let's say that I want to find out context about it. I want to find out what was happening right before this happened, whether it is for the entire data set. So I could do surrounding messages, 1 minute before, 1 minute after, 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, or I could even do it just for the host itself. Let's say that I knew that the breach was on this particular host. I can say, show me the data 1 minute before and 1 minute after for that particular host. And there you go. It goes and runs that same query. And it tells me, you notice how here my message is still highlighted in light blue, and I'm showing a whole minute worth of data right before it and a whole minute of data right after it. And you notice that I'm on page 1282 of 2500 because there was a lot of data in those 2 minutes that I decided to pull that data. So this, what you just saw me do is use log reduce to identify those messages that are happening not that often. So let me just go back to here. I used log reduce to identify what are the messages that are not happening, that are happening just a few times that I should be keeping an eye on. And then taking that message, digging into that message specifically to find out what that message was all about, and then taking a step further and saying, now show me the context of that message, show me what was happening right before and right after that message happened. Okay? Let me show you another one that's pretty interesting, and this one is called log compare. So here is my query, right? Lab security snort for the last 60 minutes. If I run a log compare, what log compare does is it's running a log reduce. Remember log reduce, what we just ran? It's logging a log reduce now for the last 60 minutes, and then it runs a second log reduce for 60 minutes, but 24 hours ago. So it does a time shift of -24. And what that means is that it's comparing the signatures from yesterday to the signatures of today. And it's coming back and it's saying, hey, Mario, this signature, which happened 3,000 times this time, is about 1% less than what was happening yesterday. Let's look at something a little more interesting. How about this one? This one seems a little interesting. This one happened 39 times today, which is 39% more than it was happening yesterday. So clearly, yesterday I was not having this DREM Trojan beacon happening, and it's starting to show me trends, and it's starting to show me that something is going on today that I should keep an eye on. Or look at this one. This one is saying that this one here, which happened 33 times this time, is 18% more than what it was doing yesterday. Or this one here, which is pretty big. Or more importantly, these other two ones. These two, it says that it happened once today, and they're completely new, meaning they weren't happening 24 hours ago, and they are absolutely new. So now I want to keep an eye on those because this is something that that wasn't happening before. Like, look at this one. This one says successful gobbles SSH, successful administrator privilege gained. So clearly something I would want to keep an eye on. So again, log compare is the ability to look at something to compare signatures from the past to signatures from the present. And I just clicked this button, which takes the 24-hour default, but you can change it to 7 days or use some other custom time frame as well to be able to compare those. Okay, so I've shown you a couple of ones here. I've shown you log reduce, I've shown you log compare. Let's talk about a few other ones that are pretty good here for you. Here's one called outlier, and here's one called one predict. So outlier, in this case, I'm looking for anomalies in the number of failed logins, right? So what it allows me to do is it allows me to look at my CloudTrail data. I'm parsing the event name, and I'm parsing response elements and console login. And then with a where clause, I'm saying, listen, I only want those where event name equals console login and those which have a login result of failure. So I'm only looking for failed login attempts, right? So then if I just count all those messages, and I'm just giving it a pretty name called failed login attempts. I'm counting those messages by time slice because I created my time slice to allow me to see a trend over time. So now every 30 minutes, I can count how many login attempts I have, and then I can plot that out by using the outlier operator. Let me show you this. I'm going to run a query similar to this one. Unfortunately, I don't have in my data failed logins in my CloudTrail data. So I'm going to just run it with something slightly different, but I still will be able to show you. Let me go in here. I think I have, let me just run this one. Okay. So I don't have failed logins. So I'm just running it against logins. This is my one login data, and I'm just running it against logins. But imagine that you can do the exact same stuff. You can go in here and create this same query where you're looking just for failed logins, where event name equals console login and failure. So what you're seeing is I time slice, I create a time slice. So I'm taking this 60 minutes and I'm time slicing it every 2 minutes, meaning I have 30 slices. And then I'm doing a count by that time slice. And then I am applying an outlier on that count. What that means is, well, let me show you something first. Let me get rid of that line in there and just run the query and show you what that looks like. That just gives me the count by time slice. So for each one of those time slices, it gives me a count. And if I plot that on a line, it just looks something like that. It's essentially telling me, listen, here is a plot of how many logins, or let's pretend these were failed logins, how many failed logins you've had in the last 60 minutes, right? Now, if we do an outlier on that, let me show you what it does. It actually plots the actual data points. It plots the number of failed logins, but it also gives me this standard deviation. So this area, this gray area or light blue area around it is the standard deviation. And what it's saying is, let me show you the data points for that. What it did is it not only calculated the count, it calculated an upper, a lower, a count error, an indicator of violation, a mean, a standard deviation, all that math so that it can plot it this way. And what it's showing me is that, let me explain what all these other things are. Window means how many data points should I go back in order to identify what the standard deviation should be here. So let me show you this little, see where my arrow is, there's a little line going down and you see the data point. This here is the data point itself. But these points up here, this one and these ones are the calculated thresholds according to 5 data points back. So it's going to go back 5 data points in order to calculate what the standard deviation should be here. So it's based in history. It says go back 5 data points, historical data points, and identify what the standard deviation should be. Threshold means how many standard deviations. If I say 1, I'm going to have more data points outside of that standard deviation. If I say 4, I'm going to have very few, if any, data points outside of that standard deviation, right? You see that? If I say back to 2 where it was, you see a few data points outside of that standard deviation. Consecutive means how many data points have to be outside of the standard deviation before I alert you, before I put a little pink triangle. And direction just says, do you want me to alert you of just those things that are above the standard deviation or the ones that are above and below? If you want both, you just do a plus minus, and you are going to get both directions, as you see here, right? But let's keep it simple. So in this case, these pink triangles are showing us cases where we have a higher number of failed logins, meaning that we are outside of that standard deviation. And as I showed you before, I could set up an alert on any of those points here. All right, let me show you another one that is pretty cool. Let me show you this one called Predict. As the name suggests, it allows you to predict what's happening, what will be happening in the future according to the data that has had in the past. So let's take a peek at one of the queries in here. I'm going to go here and see if I have anything for Predict. It looks like I do. In this case, I am looking at traffic coming from Mexico. So I'm looking at my proof point traffic that has the word Mexico in it. I'm time slicing it by 5 minutes, and then I'm doing a count of that data. I'm just giving it the name rogue traffic, but in reality, it could have just been called count, doesn't matter. And I'm counting it by time slice. And then, so up to here, it's the same as what we've done in the past. All I'm doing is I'm just counting it and I'm plotting it. But what I'm doing additionally with the bottom line is I'm running a predict. I'm saying, listen, according to the data points you have in the past, look for the next 12 data points that are 5 minutes each. So let's look at the next hour's worth of data. And in this case, I'm using the simple model, right? Just a straight line. So it looks like it's leveled and it continues for the next time, and it looks like it's just a flat line from there. There is an autoregressive model that if you were to choose that model, it actually takes cycles into account, and it can add those cycles to your modeling up there as well. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's look at a couple of other ones in here. Time compare. I won't go through this, and I'll let you guys try it out on your labs, because these are all part of them. But this one is showing you how you can identify a 5-fold or a 10-fold or an X-fold, whatever you decide, increase in denied traffic. So again, in this case, it's looking at Palo Alto network traffic, and it's looking at and that has the word traffic in it. I'm saying where action equals deny, and notice that in this case, action is already a field that was parsed by one of my field extraction rules, right? So I could have, instead of saying where action is denied, I could have moved that where clause to the top and said, and action equals denied. Oops, sorry about that. I then count by action. I then use the compare with time shift. In this case, I'm comparing 4 15-minute periods. So I'm going back a whole hour worth. And then I'm doing a little bit of counting. And this 5 is the one that you would change if you want a 10-fold or a 15-fold. But essentially, I'm looking at my average and comparing it to 5 times if this where clause would eliminate anything that is where the present is not 5 times more than the past, right? This other one here is doing a lookup, a geographical lookup. Actually, I'll do that one for you, because that's a visually pleasing one. So let me just do that one here. Again, I'm going to cheat because I have it already built. What this one is doing, it's going here, and let me show you first. Oops. Let me get rid of this so you can see what it does. It looks for Palo Alto network that has the word traffic, and then it uses the lookup operator. And this is something that we offer for free to you. We have a database of IP addresses where you can provide an IP address, in this case, your own IP address. You can provide it to us, and we can go against, you can go against our database and pull out fields like latitude, like longitude, country code, country name, city. And so let me just show you that first. If you look at this query, it gives you, let me show you first. Oh, actually, I don't have any data in those, which is, that's a little, let me see if this is something that that has to do with my, oh no, it isn't. I don't know why this is not working, but it's possible that all the IP addresses that I have in this Palo Alto Networks data are private IP addresses, and therefore I won't be able to, I won't have information about private IP addresses. Maybe I'll show it to you with a slightly different data then. Let me just look for, let's say, sorry, I got here in a rut by trying to show you this. Let's pull up the Labs Apache access data, since I know that that does have public IP addresses. So here's my Apache data. There's the IP address, and there's a field called IP that I'm going to use. So I'm going to say, look up latitude, longitude, and all that stuff where IP, since my field is also called IP, I'm going to say where IP on IP. And what you will see is hopefully a whole bunch of IP addresses. And there it is. There's latitude, there's longitude, country name, country code, and city. So what it did is it took my IP address and then it looked up all these other fields from this service here called GeoDefault. And then I can do a count by those fields, as you will see here. So here's my count of those fields, and I can even map those fields. So if you were wondering how those maps were built, there you go. Now you know the secret. It's as simple as that. We just count by the latitude and longitude, and that allows us to map it. But I could take it a step further and say, if I want the traffic that is outside of this country, or if I want the traffic that is for a particular country, I can choose where country code equals something. In this case, it's where country code is not US, and then I can map that traffic and see where the traffic outside of the US is coming from, right? There you go. So, so that's how you can do traffic destinations outside of the US. And by the way, it didn't work before only because the IP addresses I have in my Palo Alto Networks data are private IP addresses. So it wouldn't be able to find those private IPs. All right, so again, I would highly, highly encourage that you guys try out the labs. Just to point it out, I'm gonna go here and show you that, that these labs kind of walk you through. Here's some security-related queries for AWS with a couple of bonuses as well. This is showing you how to use log reduce, how to use log compare, how to use outlier. So I'm kind of covering it at a high level, but you'll be able to try some of these labs and get a little bit more detail on those as well. All right, so a few other advanced operators. So for those of you in the security world, you know that one of the big things that you have to do is you have to start correlating events. So something happened, let's say, let's take this one here, transaction. Something happened in your security snort data that you want to compare against the stuff that happened in your Lab Apache access data. So here's a good example. As a matter of fact, let me go grab this from your from the labs. Let's grab, where was that one? I think it's this one here. Okay, so let me grab this one and cut and paste it into my environment. Again, this is one of the labs that you guys will be doing. In this one in particular, what it's doing is it's using the transaction operator to help identify the source IPs in my Apache logs that correlate to IPs that my network intrusion detection and that Snort has flagged as related to a web app attack. So let's go take a peek. I'm going to go here. Just open a new query, or I'm just going to go and replace this one here and run this. But essentially, what you're seeing is it's looking for two different data sources. It's looking for security snort data that has the words web application attack. And it's also looking for source category lab Apache access data. So it's bringing all those data sets in. And then it is parsing the IP address from one of them. And notice it says a no drop because that means, by the way, if you do not see this pattern, don't worry, don't drop those messages because this other statement is going to parse what I need from you, right? So it parses out the IP addresses from both, and then it uses the transaction operator to use it. It uses the IP address to match one message to the other, right? And here, what you see in the results is messages that showed up in Lab Apache Access, but also showed up in security snort data. So this IP address here, 70.69.152.165, showed up in my Apache Access data 4,000 times. It only showed up in security snort once, but that was enough to be able to say, okay, here's an IP address that it's showing up on both of them. It's not saying that something is wrong, but I might want to keep an eye on that kind of stuff as well. All right, so a few operators to help you correlate data. There's the transaction operator, there is the transactionize operator, there's also the subquery operator, and you might be wondering at this point, well, how do I know the differences? And there's a little table here that kind of gives you the rule of thumb. The transaction operator performs an outer join. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys to see. Basically, the transaction operator is performing an outer join, and it's producing aggregate results, meaning you don't get the detail of each and every message because it's an aggregate result. On the other hand, the transaction operator also does an outer join, but in this case, it does operate on the raw messages. Therefore, you get the detail of each of the raw messages themselves. And then you have this subquery operator, which performs an inner join, and in this case, it returns raw data so you can see the details of each one of them. So let me just run the query for. Let's take this one. I'm going to cheat again, just copy and paste. So grab that and show you how the subquery operator works. In this case, I'm going to go here, just replace this one, and drop this one. So what this one is doing is, it's running two different queries. The first one says, listen, go get me all the Lab Apache Access data. The second query, which is in here, says, all right, I'm going to run a subquery. The subquery says, go find my snort data that has web application attack in it. Parse out the stuff, and then grab the IP address and pass that IP address called source IP, pass it on to the outside query. Right, so basically, I ran a subquery that went and grabbed all messages that have the word web application attack in it, and it uses that IP address, and then it says, okay, now count by source IP, which is the field that came from that query, method, status code, and URL, which are fields that were part of the initial query itself. Right, so you see how you can do a subquery to filter out more data from an original query itself. All right, so quite a few ways of correlating your data. There is one other thing I wanted to show you as well before we get into dashboards and that kind of stuff. Let me see if the slides. Oh, actually, the slides are not showing it. So let me just show it to you here. I'm going to use one of the labs just to show you that. All right. So I talked a little bit about threat intelligence before. Let me show you. I think I should have that query already built, but if not, I'm going to build it here. Let me just close some of these guys in here. Let's see. Let's close this one too. All right. So let's start a new query, and all right. Yeah. Let me show you this one here. Basically, what I'm doing here, ignore the first line for now. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But what I'm doing is I am providing an IP address, and what it's doing is we then look up the following fields. We look for type, we look for raw, for actor, we look for threat level from this service that we provide to you. Essentially, what we do is we have a partnership with CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike allows us to send them IP addresses, email addresses, domains, URLs, file names. There we go. Any of these, and they can tell us if that is an indicator of compromise, if there's a potential threat with that particular item that we pass on to them, right? So again, what we're doing is we're doing a lookup from the CrowdStrike database on a particular threat. So in this case, what I did is I said, star just says, give me everything. But then I said limit one, meaning I don't want everything. I just want one message returned, because that one message that got returned, essentially these lines that I put in here, it's just so that you get one result. And the reason why I want that result is because to that one result, I want to create a new field called my threat. And I'm hard coding the value 158 to that threat. So now I can go ahead and look up that threat against the CrowdStrike database. And if you notice, what comes back for 158, 69, 196, 112 is that, yes, it found it in the database. It found it with a malicious confidence of low. Here's the IP address, and here is the message that it found for that IP address. Let me just show you. It said that the indicator is that, the type is IP address, the false deleted is false, published date is on this particular date, last updated on this date. There are no reports or actors or malware families. So I just found an IP address that happens to have a low malicious confidence, right? But you see there all the detail that CrowdStrike has on it, right? So this is just showing you a query, a very simple query, to be able to test either an IP address or an email address or a domain or a URL or any file name to find out if that has been compromised. All right, so the queries that I normally get here is, well, this is great, but I don't want to, I mean, can't this be simplified? Can't this be made a little bit easier? And the answer is yes. Let me show you how we can use a template. In this case, this is the query itself. So let's say that you want to allow non-technical people to be able to search for IOCs, right? Perhaps they want to see if the site www.sumologic has been compromised, right? And what they would do is they would enter the item in here, run a query. If they get no results, that means that it went against the CrowdStrike database and it found nothing. But if you put something that, oh, I forgot what that IP address was. So let me just close it and open it again. But if you go against something that it might have in its database, like in this case 158.69 such and such, then it comes back with the information that it found from it. And by the way, if you're wanting to test these, our documentation, if you look for our documentation and just search for threat intelligence, we have several IOCs that you can use for testing purposes to see what kind of results you get back from this threat intelligence lookup. But what I wanted to show you right now is the fact that you can create this kind of query here called a search template. And if you in reality look at it in the back end, it really is a query. Here is a query itself. And you saw me show you that query before, except that I just built this pretty UI in front of it so that someone doesn't have to search it. So how do you build it? Well, let me show you. I think it was here, right? Yes. So here is the query, the initial query. All you have to do is highlight whatever it is that you want to create a parameter of. And in here, you can say, create a parameter. And then that'll allow you to enter the name. In my case, let's call it IOC. And then you can specify default values. You can specify what the data string is going to be. You can specify a description. You can even set values for that parameter, right? So you can just say, I'm going to give you straight up text entries, or I'm going to give you label value pairs, or maybe I'm going to give you a lookup file so that you can go and have a drop down and choose from that kind of stuff, right? So I won't go too deep into this, only because your labs have a lab to do exactly that. It's just going to show you how to create a query template for a threat intel lookup. And it's going to take it even further and show you how to create your own lookup as well from that. All right. So with that said, let me pivot here for just a second. Again, I'm going to encourage you to try the labs. That's going to give you good foundation on how to do a lot of these things. But let's talk a little bit about monitoring your data. So great, now you know how to create some dashboard. I'm sorry, some queries. You even know how to chart some of this stuff because you saw the outlier. You probably saw predict. You have some good analytics out there. And you're starting to wonder, great, how do I create dashboards out of that stuff, right? Hopefully, most of this should be a review for most of you, but I'm going to walk you through how to create a simple dashboard, and then I'm going to walk you how to create an alert as well. So let me go back here to the training instance, and let's get rid of this one here for now. Let's say that you have this kind of query in here. We ran a query, we get our nice fancy chart, and we want it added to a dashboard. It's as simple as clicking Add to Dashboard. And you can give it a name. So this would be failed logins outlier. And you would then specify what dashboard you want to add it to. And this is a list of all your dashboards in here. Or if you wanted to create a new one, Mario security dashboard, security dashboard. Then you can do that right here. It creates a new dashboard. You can put it in your personal folder or somewhere else, click on add. And as you would expect, it creates a new dashboard with your name and just one panel as part of it. If you wanted to add another data panel to it, what you do is you go run your query. Like in this case, here is my query, here's my results, add to dashboard. I can call it whatever I want. I'm just going to call it GeoLookup, and I can add it to that Mario security dashboard. There it is. Click on add. And as you would expect, there is my second panel for my dashboard. So it's simple as that. You just go about adding your panels to your dashboards like you did, like I showed you there. And I'm going to do I have one last one here? No, that was not an interesting one. But anyway, that's how you go about adding your panels to your dashboards. There's a few more things to it. You can toggle the theme. Perhaps you like the darker theme instead. You can also add non-data panels. You can add a title panel. You can add a text panel. So this is my first dashboard, right? I can add a title panel and I can move it about to wherever I want. So perhaps I want to extend it all the way to the end here and have a title to it. Or I can add a text panel. Understanding your data. So you might be the one who created the data, but it could be someone else who's actually reading that data. So you might want to give them a little bit of explanation of what that data is all about. You can even also add links to other dashboards. Perhaps you want to suggest that they also check these other dashboards out when they look at that kind of stuff. And if you click submit, it creates a text field that you can then add to, let's say that we wanted to add it here, and we want to move this one here, and you get the point. Maybe move this thing over. And there you go. In less than 5 minutes, I was able to create a dashboard having a little bit of the information that I want to share with others. And share was the key. Notice that, well, before I go to share, notice that you can do a couple of other things. You can delete it, you can favorite, you can full screen it. You can change the data access level. So you can set it to have the viewer's data access level, meaning if they only see production data, this dashboard will only show them production data. Or you can say my data access level, which means I want them to be able to see all the data that I get to see, in which case they could potentially have more data than they normally have access to. All right. What else can I do? I can share this dashboard, and this is key. You definitely want to get people to start sharing, including yourself, because this is how other people are going to take advantage of what you've built, and they can build on it and improve it. So let's say that I want to share this. I want to share this particular dashboard with Josh. but not only do I want to share it for him to see it, I actually want I want to give him edit rights or manage rights or some other rights so that we both can actually take advantage and edit it and manage it, right? So I could, like I said, Josh is going to edit it, but then I am going to give my entire organization, I'm going to give them view access. So this, what would do is it would give the entire organization view access, but it would only give Josh edit access to it. So if I share that now, actually, let me go back in here and show you what it looks like. So if I look at who has access now, you see that Mario has manage, Josh has edit, and the organization has view access to this thing. One other thing, I can also get a shareable link. So I can grab this link, I can copy it, and I can send it to folks who have access to this dashboard and be able to see it. I can take it a step further. I can also make this dashboard available outside of the org, meaning if someone does not have a login into Sumo, I can make this dashboard available to them. The dangerous one is this one. I can make this dashboard available to the world, meaning that anybody who can get their hands on this link would have access to that dashboard and can view their content. Or probably more interesting would be, I'm going to whitelist a whole bunch of IP addresses, and only the people with those IP addresses will be able to see to use this link to view that dashboard as well. But what's important is sharing is caring, and whenever you can, you should start sharing your content itself. And the last thing I'm going to mention, which you saw me use in the demo, is the use of filters. I have the ability to add filters, so I can go in here and say, I want to change, I want to apply a country code. And what this allows me to do is, it allows me to use this dashboard as a template. So people who are focused in US only would be able to come, or not US because there's no, I had a filter here saying no US data. So what about France? In this case, the query would run and it would show only data for France. Or if someone else is coming from a different location, they would be able to use this same dashboard to find out the results for their area. Actually, it's Great Britain, I think. And there you go. So this is what dashboards are about. Like, you can set up filters, you can set up your panels, and then more importantly, you want to share them with other people. And the last thing that I'm going to say is, once you're done editing, you have the ability to turn your dashboard into live mode. What live mode means is people can the dashboards will be automatically updated, which means that now you can put them in your operations center. So the rule of thumb is, if you're going to be displaying this in large panels somewhere, in large TVs or monitors, then you want to turn it into live mode. You want the, let's say this panel here, what's going to happen is, since it runs for 60 minutes, minute 61 is going to fall off, minute 1 is going to come in, and it's always going to have the last 60 minutes in the current state in here. All right, so I've shown you a lot today. I've shown you a lot of how to create dashboards, how to create alerts. I've shown you how to create, how to use a lot of these very specific operators. But what I want to show you, I want to take the last 5-10 minutes to show you, is that there is a lot of out-of-the-box content. Specifically for security and compliance. And I won't be able to show you everything because there are tons of them, but essentially these out-of-the-box apps help you set up real-time monitoring and alerting. They really help you with this whole threat intelligence that I was talking about. They help you simplify the compliance part of your job. And although I can't show you anything, I just want to page through a few of these and let you know that we have apps for Palo Alto networks, we have apps for CloudTrail, we have apps for VPC flow logs, apps for guard duty, threat intelligence for AWS. So for those of you who happen to be on AWS, we actually look at AWS data and start parsing through that data so that we can identify if you have IOCs, indicators of compromise or potential threats in that data as well. If you are not using AWS, we have an app called Threat Intel Quick Analysis, which you can point to any source and do the same kind of information, do the same kind of analysis on that. We have CrowdStrike data, Office 365. So in short, a lot of data. And again, we have labs that help you try some of those. So just to wrap up, I'm going to show you, oops, it looks like it kicked me out of my session, which might take me a little bit longer to get back in. So let me just see if I have some in here. If you were to install one of these, let's say that I wanted to install the Palo Alto network one. Oops, Palo Alto, here we go. So you notice that we have it for network 6 and network 8 because their log formatting changed. Let's say they have Palo Alto network 8. You can even preview the dashboards that would get installed. So this is the kind of dashboards that would get installed. Probably a little too small for you to see right now, but this is showing me things like spyware threats versus virus threats versus vulnerability threats. The key thing with these apps is that they might not give you 100% of what you need because you're going to have some very particular and unique use cases, but it will give you 80, 90, maybe even 95% of what you need. So it's a great way to start so that you don't have to start from scratch. So the first thing that I would do if I were you is I would look at the data that I'm bringing in. I would go back to this catalog and I would sift through this page and try to see if we already have an app for what you're trying to bring. Look, we've got Silence, we've got Duo Security, we've got Evident.io. So a lot of these endpoint tools that you probably are already using, bring in that data, install the app, and you'll be able to start taking advantage of this and analyzing it right off the bat. All right, that's a lot of stuff I shared with you. So where do you go from here? By the way, there's a lot of use cases. All these links, I'm going to share these slides with you, but all these links point to community. Remember before I was showing you our community? So how to create an alert on ratios or percentages, how to detect patterns and changes across environments, or for security specific, remember I showed you that there were some security queries for AWS. Oops. There's some for Linux, some for Windows, some for Palo Alto networks. So I'd encourage you, don't start from scratch. There's a lot of information out there that can help you get started without having to start from scratch. All right, last but not least, where do you go from here? There's a lot of information out there for you. First thing is, if you go to that Learn tab, you have some tutorials, you have some videos to get you started. If you do not care to start on those videos, you also have those cheat sheets that I was talking about. You have documentation, you have what are the new things that are out there. You have community, which I talked about before. You have more webinars in the training side. And last but not least, you have, of course, the ability to open support cases out there. So when you get a chance, visit that Learn tab, and that should get you going. So if you have any questions, please send them my way. In the meantime, let me talk a little bit about certification. If you try the hands-on labs, I guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee you because it's you taking the test, but I can almost guarantee you that you will pass the certification. Certification is 30 multiple choice questions, is 60 minutes. You have 3 attempts to take this exam. Most people pass it on the first or the second attempt. I haven't had anyone so far ask me for a 4th attempt, so that tells me that everybody passes it definitely by the 3rd one. But look in statistics, most people pass it in the first and second attempts, and people take about 35 to 40 minutes to complete the exam. So the one thing you want to make sure is when you're about to take your exam, make sure that you're in your own instance. And the reason I say that is because it's possible that you would be in this training instance because you're using our data and you have been using our instance for training. So just make sure you log out by going here, signing out, signing into your own instance. And once you're in that instance, you want to go to certification and take the exam. If you don't take it from your instance, you're going to be giving someone else credit. You're going to be giving some training user credit for this kind of stuff. So just make sure that you're taking it from your own instance. There is one question from the audience, and then the question is, will you be emailing out the links to us all? And the answer is yes. I'll be emailing you a link to the recording for today's session, and I will also be emailing you the slides themselves, or link to the slides, so that you are able to download those as well. All right. Great. If there are no other questions, we'll break for today. But if there's any questions in the future, remember you can hit us on community, or you can also, I failed to mention this, but we also have a Slack channel. Let me just briefly show you this right before I head out. If you go to that Learn tab and you go to, oops, my screen is going crazy. If you go to that community link that I was talking about before, oh, it's not enabling it right now, but sorry, it's because this is a demo and I don't have it enabled. But if you go to community, in there you will find a link to our Slack channel as well. It's slack.sumologic.com, and you can join our Slack channel and get real-time help on some of your questions as well. All right, great. If there are no more questions, I wish you good luck, and I think you should be in good shape. If you try the hands-on labs, you should be in really good shape to be able to run those exams. All right. If there are no questions, I'm gonna stop the sharing, stop the recording, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much.